Against the Gods, The Remarkable Story of Risk by Peter L. Bernstein. Picture this, it's 1654 in France. A wealthy nobleman, the Chevalier de Marais, has a problem. He's brilliant, a bit of a philosopher, but mostly he's a gambler who lives for the gaming tables. He's created a clever betting system for dice that gives him just enough of an edge to win, slowly and steadily, through countless small bets on outcomes that are slightly more likely than his opponents realize. Then he tries applying his system to a different game, and everything falls apart. Money starts draining from his pockets. He can't understand why. The math should work, at least as far as he understands it. But it just doesn't. Frustrated and confused, he takes his puzzle to one of Europe's most brilliant minds, a young, intense mathematician named Blaise Pascal. The question seems simple enough, but its implications turn out to be enormous. It's about dividing stakes in an unfinished game of chance. Say you and I are playing a game to 6 points, and we have to stop when I'm ahead 5-3. How do we split the prize money fairly? Sounds like a trivial gambling question, right? Just a puzzle for people with too much money and time. But that single question, passed from a nobleman to a mathematician, ignited a revolution. It led Pascal to exchange letters with another genius, Pascal de Fermat, and together they laid the groundwork for probability theory. They discovered how to use numbers to forecast the future. In doing so, they unlocked the single most powerful idea separating our modern world from thousands of years of history that came before it. That idea is the mastery of risk. Today, we're diving into a landmark book, Against the Gods, The Remarkable Story of Risk by Peter L. Bernstein. This isn't just about finance or mathematics. It's the story of a monumental shift in human consciousness. For most of history, people saw the future as the domain of the gods, a whim of fate, something to pray about or fear, but never control. The great pyramids were built, empires rose and fell, brilliant minds mapped the stars, but no one had figured out how to systematically think about the future and make choices based on a rational understanding of what might happen next. By the time we finish this journey together, you'll understand how that changed. You'll see the invisible architecture underpinning our modern lives, from the insurance policy protecting your home, to the stock market powering our economy, to the medical trials bringing us new medicines. You'll understand that managing risk isn't just a tool for corporations. It's the very engine of progress. It's the story of how humanity dared to steal fire from the gods, not with a torch, but with numbers. Let's begin where all good stories should, at the beginning. But in this case, the beginning is defined by a curious absence, a great silence in the historical record. Think about the ancient Greeks. We see them as intellectual giants, don't we? They gave us philosophy, democracy, logic, and geometry. Their minds were astonishingly sophisticated. They were also obsessive gamblers. Archaeologists have found dice, or their ancient equivalent called astragali, knucklebones from sheep, in digs all over the Greek world. Even their myths begin with a game of chance. The three great gods, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, rolled dice for control of the universe. Zeus won the heavens, Poseidon the seas, and Hades, the unlucky loser, got the underworld. So here you have a civilization obsessed with gambling, logic, and mathematics. They seem perfectly positioned to discover the laws of probability. And yet, they never did. It's one of history's great puzzles. They played games of chance for centuries, yet the way they scored them made no mathematical sense. They'd assigned the same value to a difficult throw of the dice as an easy one. It was as if they saw each dice roll as a direct intervention from the gods, a message from fate, not as one possibility out of a measurable set of outcomes. The idea of looking for patterns, of counting possibilities, simply never occurred to them. Why? Peter Bernstein suggests the answer lies in their entire worldview. To the Greeks, and to the Romans who followed them, the world was divided. Above, in the heavens, there was order. Stars and planets moved in predictable, harmonious cycles. It was beautiful, perfect, divine. But down here on Earth, life was messy, chaotic, unpredictable. It was the domain of fickle gods, random chance, and inescapable fate. The future wasn't something you could calculate. It was something you learned by consulting an oracle or sacrificing an animal to appease the winds. The idea that you, a mere mortal, could use numbers to systematically predict tomorrow was more than just foreign. It was sacrilege, an act of defiance against the gods. And there was another, more practical barrier, their numbering system. Imagine trying to do multiplication or division with Roman numerals. How do you multiply 123 by 47? It's a nightmare. You can't do it in your head. You need an abacus, a counting board with pebbles. Their numbers were fine for recording results. 3 goats, 10 soldiers, but they were terrible tools for abstract calculation. Without a flexible and powerful numbering system, the mathematics of probability simply couldn't be born. For nearly 1,000 years after Rome fell, this worldview held. The future remained a mystery, now guided by the will of a single Christian God. But the fundamental belief was the same. Your destiny was not in your hands. Then, around the year 1202, a young Italian mathematician named Leonardo of Pisa, we know him today as Fibonacci, published a book called Liber Abaci, or the Book of Calculation. As a young man, he'd traveled to North Africa and encountered a revolutionary invention that Arab scholars had brought from India, the Hindu-Arabic numbering system. The system we use today. It had 10 digits, including the most magical and important one of all, 0. 0 was more than just a number, it was a concept. It allowed for positional notation, making the difference between 1, 10, and 100 instantly clear. Suddenly, complex calculations that were impossible with Roman numerals became simple. Fibonacci's book was a sensation. It spread these new numbers throughout Europe, and with them, it spread a new way of thinking. Bookkeeping, commerce, navigation, architecture. Everything relying on measurement was transformed. The tools were now in place. But a tool is useless without a change in mindset. That change came with the Renaissance. Starting in the 14th and 15th centuries, something shifted in the European soul. There was a new spirit of exploration, of individualism, of humanism. People began believing they weren't just passive pawns in a divine game. They were creators, innovators, masters of their own destiny. Artists like Piero della Francesca painted human beings standing solidly on earth, without halos. Explorers like Columbus set sail not just with faith, but with calculations and maps. The world was no longer a closed book written by God. It was a vast, unknown territory, waiting to be discovered, measured, and understood. And with this new spirit of discovery came a new kind of activity, capitalism. Trade and commerce exploded. And trade is, at its heart, risky business. A merchant in Venice, sending a ship full of goods to Alexandria, is making a bet. He's betting the ship won't sink, that pirates won't attack, that the goods will arrive safely, and that he can sell them for profit. He's taking a calculated risk about the future. To take a calculated risk, you need 2 things that had been largely unnecessary before: bookkeeping and forecasting. You need to track your costs and profits, and you need to make an educated guess about future prices, future demand, and future dangers. It was in this new world, a world of powerful numbers and belief in human agency, that a Franciscan monk named Luca Pacioli sat down in 1494 and posed that fateful question about the unfinished game of chance. He couldn't solve it. For the next 150 years, the puzzle stumped Europe's greatest mathematical minds. It was waiting for the right people, at the right time. Those people were Blaise Pascal and Pierre de Fermat. When the Chevalier des Marais brought them the problem of the points in 1654, he wasn't just asking a gambler's question. He was unknowingly tapping into the central challenge of this new age. How do we make decisions when the future is uncertain? The correspondence that followed between Pascal, the tormented religious genius in Paris, and Fermat, the quiet, brilliant lawyer in Toulouse, is one of the pivotal moments in intellectual history. They didn't need to roll dice over and over like a gambler. They approached the problem with pure reason, with the elegant logic of mathematics. Pascal, in a moment of genius, visualized the solution using a simple tool we now call Pascal's triangle. You may have seen it in math class. It looks like this: 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 3, 3, 1, 1, 4, 6, 4, 1, and so on. Each number is simply the sum of the two numbers directly above it. It seems simple, but hidden within this triangle are answers to a huge number of questions about probability. The rows show you all possible combinations for an event with two outcomes, like flipping a coin. If you flip a coin once, the second row shows two outcomes: one way to get heads, one way to get tails. If you flip it twice, the third row shows four possible outcomes: one way to get two heads, one way to get two tails, and two ways to get one of each. If you flip it 3 times, the fourth row shows 8 outcomes: one way to get 3 heads, 3 ways to get 2 heads and a tail, 3 ways to get 1 head and 2 tails, and 1 way to get 3 tails. The triangle reveals the underlying structure of chance, and with it, Pascal and Fermat solved the problem of the points. Their solution was profound. They argued that the fairest way to divide the stakes is based on the probability each player has of winning if the game were to continue. They used the triangle to count all possible ways the rest of the game could play out, then assigned the money proportionally. For the first time, the future was being quantified. A vague degree of belief was being replaced by a hard number. This was the breakthrough. This was the moment risk was tamed. But Pascal, ever the philosopher, took it one step further. In his famous Pascal's wager, he applied this new way of thinking to the ultimate question: does God exist? He framed it as a bet. You can bet that God exists, or you can bet that he doesn't. You can't avoid the bet. By living, you're choosing one path or the other. Reason, he said, can't tell you the probability. It's a coin toss at the end of time. So how do you decide? You have to look at the consequences. If you bet God exists and you're right, you gain eternal salvation, an infinite reward. If you bet God exists and you're wrong, you lose nothing much. You just lived a virtuous life. But if you bet against God and you're wrong, you face eternal damnation, an infinite loss. Given the outcomes, Pascal argued, the only logical decision is to wager on God. What's revolutionary about this isn't the religious conclusion, it's the method. Pascal was the first to articulate that a decision isn't just about the probability of an outcome, but also about the value or utility you place on that outcome. He just invented the foundation of modern decision theory. This was a giant leap, but the ideas were still confined to the world of games and philosophy. The next step was bringing them down to earth, into the messy reality of human life. And for that, we have to turn from the brilliant mathematicians of France to a humble shopkeeper in London. His name was John Grant, and in 1662 he published a small book that would change the world. Grant was a haberdasher of small wares, a seller of buttons and needles. But he was also a man of immense curiosity. For years, London's parishes had been publishing weekly bills of mortality, lists of how many people had been christened and how many had died, along with causes of death. To most people, these were just grim, sad lists, but to John Grant, they were data. He collected these bills, stretching back decades, and began looking for patterns. No one had ever done this before. He was a pioneer, stepping into completely new territory. What he found was astonishing. He discovered that more boys were born than girls, but that men tended to die sooner, so the numbers evened out. He calculated the shockingly high rate of infant mortality, finding that about 36 out of every 100 children died before age 6. He noticed that some diseases were seasonal, and that London's population swelled and shrank as people fled the city during plague outbreaks. He was the first person to use a limited set of data, a sample, to make an educated guess about a larger whole. This process is called statistical inference, and it's the foundation of all modern statistics. He made the first reasoned estimate of London's population, concluding it was around 384,000 people, far from the wild guesses of millions that were common at the time. Grant's work was revolutionary because it showed that even in the chaos of life and death, there were predictable regularities. Human life, in the aggregate, wasn't entirely random. It followed patterns. And if you could find those patterns, you could begin making predictions. You could manage risk. Grant's work caught the eye of the scientific elite, including a brilliant young astronomer named Edmund Halley. Yes, the same Halley of Halley's Comet. Halley was fascinated by Grant's methods, but recognized the data from London was flawed. People were constantly moving in and out of the city. So Halley got his hands on a much better set of data from the small German town of Breslau, where meticulous records of births, deaths, and ages had been kept for years. Using this data, in 1693, Halley created the world's first mortality table based on real-world statistics. His tables showed, for a group of 100 people, how many were likely to be alive at any given age. From this, he could calculate the odds of a person of a certain age surviving another year. And from that, he could do something of immense practical importance. He could calculate the fair price for a life annuity. An annuity is a promise to pay someone an income for life in exchange for a lump sum of money up front. Governments had been selling them for years to raise money, but they were doing it blindly. They charged everyone the same price, whether they were 20 years old or 60. With Halley's table, you could for the first time price the risk properly. A 20-year-old, with many years of life ahead, should pay far more for a lifetime income than a 60-year-old. This was the birth of actuarial science. The modern life insurance industry owes its existence to the work of a button seller and an astronomer who saw patterns in the great drama of life and death. The tools of risk management were now becoming incredibly powerful, but a piece of the puzzle was still missing, a deep psychological piece. The math could tell you the probabilities, but it couldn't tell you how a human being should feel about those probabilities. It couldn't explain why we make the choices we do. For that, we must turn to another family of geniuses, the Bernoullis. The Bernoulli family was a Swiss dynasty of mathematicians in the 17th and 18th centuries. They were brilliant, competitive, and often jealous of one another. The first great insight came from Jacob Bernoulli. He spent 20 years wrestling with a fundamental question: how confident can we be that our sample of data truly represents reality? Grant had looked at a few decades of London deaths. Halley had looked at 5 years in Breslau. But how do we know if those years were typical? Jacob's answer was the law of large numbers. It's a simple but profound idea. In essence, it says that the more observations you have, the more confident you can be that your sample results are close to true reality. If you flip a coin 10 times, you might get 7 heads. It doesn't mean the coin is biased. But if you flip it 1,000 times, you can be almost certain the number of heads will be very, very close to 500. The law doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but it tells us that as our pool of information grows, our predictions become more reliable. It's the principle that allows insurance companies to operate. They can't predict if your specific house will burn down, but by insuring millions of houses, they can be very confident about the average number that will. Jacob gave us the statistical foundation, but it was his brilliant nephew, Daniel Bernoulli, who gave us the psychological one. In 1738, Daniel published a paper that tackled the question of how we value things. The mathematicians before him had assumed that decisions were based on expected value. If a lottery ticket gives you a 1 in 1,000 chance to win $1,000, its expected value is $1. A rational person, they thought, should be unwilling to pay more than $1 for it. But Daniel Bernoulli saw that this didn't match how real people behave. We don't value money in absolute terms. Our decisions depend on our circumstances. He introduced a revolutionary concept: utility. Utility is the subjective satisfaction you get from something. And he proposed a groundbreaking idea: the utility of money, is inversely proportional to the amount you already have. What does that mean? It means that an extra $1,000 means the world to a poor person, but it's barely noticeable to a billionaire. The satisfaction you get from each additional dollar decreases as your wealth grows. This simple idea explains so much about human behavior. It explains why most people are risk-averse. Think about it. Imagine you have $100,000. Someone offers you a bet, a 50-50 coin toss. If it's heads, you win $50,000. If it's tails, you lose $50,000. The expected value of this bet is 0. From a purely mathematical standpoint, you should be indifferent. But would you take the bet? Most people wouldn't. Why? Because, according to Daniel Bernoulli, the pain or the loss of utility from losing $50,000 and going down to $50,000 is far greater than the pleasure or the gain in utility from winning $50,000 and going up to $150,000. The richer you are, the less each dollar means to you. Therefore, a loss of a certain amount always feels worse than a gain of the same amount. With this one insight, Daniel Bernoulli laid the groundwork for understanding risk aversion, the principle of diminishing returns, and the entire modern field of investment management. He showed that our choices aren't just about the cold, hard numbers of probability. They're about our very human feelings, our desires, and our fears. The management of risk, he revealed, is as much an art as it is a science. It's a dance between the objective facts of the world and our subjective beliefs about what those facts mean to us. As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, these ideas continued to develop. The tools became even more powerful. Mathematicians like Carl Friedrich Gauss, one of the greatest of all time, helped perfect our understanding of one of the most important concepts in all of statistics, the normal distribution, or, as it's more commonly known, the bell curve. The bell curve describes a huge number of phenomena in the world, from the height of people in a population to the errors in astronomical measurements. It shows that most observations cluster around an average, and extreme results become less and less frequent as you move away from that average. It gives us a visual language for understanding what is normal, what is rare, and what is a deviation from the mean. But it was an eccentric English amateur scientist, a cousin of Charles Darwin named Francis Galton, who discovered a strange and powerful property hidden within this world of averages. Galton was obsessed with measurement. He measured everything: the intelligence of his fellow scientists, the effectiveness of prayer, even the degree of boredom at academic lectures. His most important work, however, came from studying heredity. He wanted to understand how traits, like height, were passed from one generation to the next. He collected massive amounts of data on the heights of parents and their adult children, and he found something fascinating. Very tall parents tended to have children who were also tall, but not quite as tall as them. And very short parents tended to have children who were short, but not quite as short as them. In both cases, the children's heights tended to drift back, or regress, toward the average height of the population. He called this phenomenon regression to the mean. It's one of the most powerful and counterintuitive ideas in all of statistics. It means that in any process where there's an element of chance, an extraordinary outcome is likely to be followed by a more ordinary one. The athlete who has a record-breaking season is likely to have a more average season the next year. The company with unbelievably high profit growth one year will probably see its growth slow down. The stock market, after a period of extreme gains or losses, will tend to revert to its long-term average performance. Pride goes before a fall, and every cloud has a silver lining. These folk wisdom expressions capture regression to the mean. It's not some mystical force. It's just a statistical reality. An extreme outcome is, by definition, a combination of skill and a lot of good luck or bad luck. The skill will likely persist, but the extreme luck probably won't. Galton's discovery has profound implications for risk management. It cautions us against extrapolating the recent past into the future forever. It tells us that trees don't grow to the sky, and that things are rarely as good or as bad as they seem in the moment. It provides a rational basis for the contrarian investor, who buys when everyone else is selling, and sells when everyone else is buying, betting that things will eventually return to normal. And so, by the dawn of the 20th century, the great intellectual journey was largely complete. The ideas born in a gambler's puzzle had blossomed into a sophisticated set of tools for understanding the world. From the simple counting of possibilities by Pascal and Fermat, to the real-world data of Grant and Halley, to the deep psychological insights of Bernoulli, and the powerful patterns revealed by Galton, humanity had developed a new language for talking about the future. We'd learned to measure uncertainty, to weigh consequences, and to make choices with a clarity our ancestors could never have imagined. The mastery of risk had transformed the future from an enemy to be feared into an opportunity to be seized. And in doing so, it unleashed the energy, the innovation, and the progress that have come to define our modern world. We had, in a very real sense, taken our stand against the gods. As we look back on this incredible story, what strikes me most is the persistent tension that Peter Bernstein so brilliantly highlights throughout the book. It's the tension between two ways of seeing the world. On one hand, you have the quantifiers, the mathematicians, the believers in hard data. They tell us that the best decisions are based on numbers, on patterns from the past, on the objective laws of probability. They give us the tools to measure risk, to calculate odds, and to build models that seem to explain everything. On the other hand, you have those who rely on more subjective degrees of belief. They're the artists of risk, who argue that the future isn't just a repetition of the past. They believe that our gut feelings, our intuition, and our unique understanding of a situation are just as important as any spreadsheet. They remind us that human behavior, with all its passion and irrationality, can obliterate the most elegant mathematical model in an instant. This is a debate that's never been resolved, because both sides are right. Risk management is neither a pure science nor a pure art. It lives in the space between. We need the numbers to ground us in reality, to protect us from wishful thinking. But we also need the wisdom to know when the numbers aren't enough, when the old patterns are breaking, and when a new future is being born. The great lesson of Against the Gods is that this journey has given us a profound sense of agency. We're no longer passive spectators watching fate unfold. The story of risk is the story of choice. The tools developed by these brilliant thinkers, from Pascal to Bernoulli to Galton, empower us to choose. They don't eliminate uncertainty. Nothing ever will. The future will always remain a mystery. But they give us a framework for making better choices in the face of that mystery. So, how can you apply these profound ideas to your own life right now? Let me suggest 3 simple things. First, start thinking in probabilities, not certainties. Our minds love to think in black and white. This will succeed, or this will fail. But the world operates in shades of gray. The next time you face a decision, try to consciously ask yourself, what is the likelihood of this outcome? Is it 90%, 60%, 20%? Just the act of framing the question this way forces a more rational and less emotional approach. Second, embrace the wisdom of regression to the mean. When things in your life are going exceptionally well, enjoy it, but be prepared for things to return to a more normal state. And more importantly, when things are going terribly wrong, when you feel like you've hit rock bottom, remember that this too is likely an extreme event. Things have a powerful tendency to get better, to move back toward the average. This isn't wishful thinking. It's a statistical reality that can give you immense hope in difficult times. Finally, understand the difference between risk and uncertainty. Risk is when you know the odds. Playing roulette is a risk. Uncertainty is when you don't even know what the game is, let alone the odds. As the world becomes more complex and interconnected, we face more true uncertainty. In those moments, the numbers can only take us so far. We must also rely on flexibility, creativity, and the courage to act with incomplete information. The story Bernstein tells isn't about eliminating risk, but about having the wisdom to know which risks are worth taking. That was a summary of Against the Gods by Peter L. Bernstein. We've explored the grand sweep of this revolutionary idea today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found in the journey itself. The true magic of this book is in the stories, the characters, and the profound intellectual adventure of watching these ideas unfold over centuries. This summary is meant to show you if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about has sparked your curiosity, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning, it's about fundamentally changing the way you see the world and your own place in it. A link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. That way, you won't miss our next deep dive into another life-changing book from the Billionaire's Bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.